TBTL Week in Review.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Week in Review. And if you're wondering, did I have to very quickly scramble and remember what the name of this segment is? You are absolutely right. But I think I nailed it, so it's a good thing I brought it up. And you might notice joining me here in a it looks like a nice sound dampened studio in the DC area is returning guest and friend of the show, Amina. How you doing, Amina?
Good. How are you?
Good. So you're over there. Can we say you're at Vox HQ?
Yes. Yes.
Nice.
For just one more week, they are moving us out of this office and we're moving into a WeWork because it's post pandemic and we're now
Wow.
so few of us come into the office that they're downsizing.
That's really interesting. Now, I just told you before we started recording that I don't want to dominate this conversation and pepper you with questions about your job. Of course, you produce Today Explained on Vox Media. It's one of the best podcasts out there, a daily podcast too. And I'm fascinated by your work. I'm so shocked to hear that you're going to a WeWork situation because I think of radio as being somewhat different. Maybe that's just my age. I think of y'all go in and you have editorial meetings and then you all go into studios and talk into microphones. Are people doing a lot of the production in their own homes? You don't need to have like an actual radio style studio anymore?
Yeah. In fact, that was our first question when they announced this change. What about our studio? But both of our hosts actually have sort of in-home studio setups. They're able to record everything from home, and they were sent by our engineering team like soundproofing material so that they could record from home. And yeah, we've since March 2020 we make the show from our individual homes. We hired a bunch of people too during the pandemic that live all around the country. So not all the team is in the same place, but for enough of us are in DC that we can sometimes come into the office and work together. We've all been together this week for kind of a team summit, and I definitely feel I definitely feel the pros and cons of working in an office with your colleagues. A lot more pros, I feel. I definitely miss the kind of organic, just being able to chat with each other and like bounce ideas off of each other. It's so much easier than over Zoom or Slack. But yeah, we have been able to make the show remotely, so they're devaluing, I guess, or there isn't as much of a need for this big office.
Okay, well, I could again keep this conversation going forever. Talking to like a real journalist is just like I could ask you a million questions as opposed to the goofiness that we do over on our side of things. But you listen to that goofiness for some reason. In fact, have you heard Thursday's show yet?
Yes.
Thank you for
so
I want to make it very clear this is not a pay-for-play system. You were invited on the show before I realized you were going to be a donor of the day on Thursday. But of course, as always, thank you so much.
Of course.
For keeping us in business. What else did you hear on the show this week that you want to talk about?
No, it's so funny. I feel sometimes like the show is personally programmed for me. Whenever you guys talk about, there was recently chatter about, or one thing Luke said that just hit so perfectly for me, and I think so few people, was that Mukilteo is culturally Edmonds, because I live in where my family lives in Mukilteo, and I grew up in Mukilteo and visit Edmonds all the time, and I'm like, you nailed it. Like no one has nailed the description of Mukilteo better than to call it culturally Edmonds.
Explain that though, not only to the people who don't live in this area, but literally to me, because I don't even know that I fully understand that.
Yes. So I think Edmonds as a city is right on the Puget Sound. So the city is full of really cute small boutique shops, and a lot of the people who live there is like a beach town feel to it when you're in like downtown Edmonds proper.
Like a destination almost, like this is where people come. Yes, okay.
It's a little less it's in the heart of suburbia, but it feels a little less suburban and a little more small town, even though Edmonds city limits go far beyond downtown Edmonds. So when you go visit downtown Edmonds, there's the ferry. You can hang out at the beach. There are, all those really cute little shops. And then as you go further out into Edmonds, when you get to, like, say, the Costco part of Edmonds,
Right.
that's more culturally Shoreline, which is, it might technically, my mom calls it the Shoreline Costco, so it might technically be Shoreline, but where that Arby's is.
Yes, of course.
and
Well,
that
the
hill.
Arby's, I know the Arby's is definitely technically Edmonds because
Right,
that's what started the irritation, Luke's irritation with me for referring to Edmonds as a place where Whirly Ball and
Right.
the Arby's is, because he's like, that's not culturally Edmonds. That's
No,
culturally
exactly.
Aurora.
Exactly. Shoreline is on Aurora, and and there's a lot more. It's like less walkable. There's more. There's the big Highway 99 that kind of splits Shoreline. And it is a little more, it feels more like a neighborhood connected to the big city of Seattle. Versus Edmonds, downtown Edmonds, which feels so different. It's more walkable. And then Mukilteo, as there are parts of Mukilteo that maybe are culturally Shoreline as well. There's a road called the Mukilteo Speedway that will take you to, like, Boeing.
Right, yes.
And that is, again, you have a lot of, like, strip malls on it and things like that. But then when you get towards downtown Mukilteo, again, you're on the Puget Sound, you catch the ferry. It's not as small town cute as Edmonds because geographically it's very hilly and there's not a lot of space to build, like, cute little there's one cute little coffee shop, and Edmonds has a couple. But yeah, that is I feel like I got us on a really long tangent about
it's very, very specific. But I do think we're going to be what's that?
Yeah, I was going to say the other very specific thing you guys said this week that caught me was about ISDN lines, which, again, like, when you said that, I got, like, this shot of cortisol as you were talking about ISDN lines. But yes.
So you're old enough to have dealt with ISDN lines as well, and I don't know if that's worth bringing up or explaining here again. But essentially, an ISDN line was like kind of a very standard piece of technology that we used in radio, where we would have, our host and guests in one studio where we were, but we might have a remote guest in another studio across the country. Let's say in WHYY in Philadelphia. To the listening audience, it sounds like everybody's in the same room because that person is talking not over a phone line, but an ISDN line. And of course, this is before the internet was, kind of big enough to handle that kind of data. We can all do that all now with computers. But yeah, there's always that moment where you're ready to start your live show. Everything's ready to go. The host says hello to the guest who's over there in Philadelphia, and you just don't know if the ISDN line is going to work or not. And there's always maybe a 1 second delay that'll just take a year off of your life as a producer, waiting to hear if that guest is ready to go.
Yes. I felt like a year was taken off my life when Luke said that he would, like, pull the cords out. It never even occurred to me until he said it that was a thing anyone would dare to do.
Okay, now this is, and I didn't bring this up on the show, but yeah, I didn't like hearing that either, because I don't think there's any engineer that wants the producer. There were once or twice, there was a rack room, that's like the technology room where the ISDN unit was, where there were some of those patch cords where you could unplug things and plug them in. And I think there was like one or two very specific moments in the radio station that I used to work for where I would know to move those things. For the most part, do not touch that shit. But I can totally see a young Luke just being like, well, it's probably this one. I don't know. The next thing you know, you're talking to NASA.
Right.
Did you do a lot of that at KUOW? That's where we met, by the way. You and I used to work together at KUOW, the public radio station here in Seattle. Did you do ISDN stuff there? I can't remember what the setup was.
Yes, we did a lot of ISDN. often it was to like record an interview with a guest, but also, especially in my earlier days at KUOW, when the local show Weekday was still on the air, it was a show where we were booking a lot of authors and people who are out of town, or sometimes even if you would get a state senator or representative in DC, you could talk to them via ISDN sometimes when they weren't insisting to like talk to you from their cell phone in a moving car. You could talk to them.
How many times did you say, you can do it on the cell phone, but
Right.
you cannot be moving. You must pull over.
Exactly. Oh, so many times. And then they so we would do use it talk to people live, and that was the scariest. That was the one that was really you would test it out, you would talk to them. I would, like, as we were waiting, try to talk to them down the line to make sure they were still there, but then there was that moment where the intro music is playing and the host is introducing and you just don't know.
And your heart's just going like this because you're describing like talking down the line. I know that we're well into the weeds here, but you know what? We started by talking about culturally Shoreline versus culturally Mukilteo. Right. So like, forget it. This is just us now. Right. But when you're talking down the line, like if it's a live thing, you've never really fully tested it until you're broadcasting live, because you can like maybe talk down a producer mic and the person in DC can hear you or whatever, but you never really know until you're live on the air, and there's only one way to find out if everything is working. Do you remember? And again, this is so specific, and I'm sorry, viewers. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I know. This wasn't even the thing I was going to.
My recollection of first meeting you was just crossing paths as you were ending your shift screening phone calls and me beginning my shift of screening phone calls in that tiny little phone booth. Is that where we first met?
I'm pretty sure, yes. It was that little phone booth. And then I do remember that when you started directing or working on The Conversation, because I interned and worked on Weekday, the more like chill morning show.
Yes.
And then The Conversation was the little more high-strung afternoon show. And when they asked me to, again, this was a very early on in my time at KOW, when they asked me to come on and call screen for The Conversation, I was really scared because of the culture of that show and just like the pressure I felt call screening. Even though I would spend 2 hours call screening Weekday, that 1 hour show, The Conversation, really freaked me out. But I remember when you would direct, I was so relieved and happy to see that you were directing, because you were so nice. And you would like come in and give me the rundown and a high five and like,
oh, that's great.
It was so great.
Oh, man, that means the world to me. Thank you so much. Yeah, because that was a pretty, that it kind of came from, I loved working on The Conversation, but it was they probably made that whole thing a little bit more pressurized than it needed to be. That was sort of the culture of the show for sure. Okay, let's get back to TBTL. What else was on your list? Anything else you wanted to talk about?
Well, and I hopefully this doesn't feel too continue to be too insidery, but the conversation around Spotify, of course, piqued my interest this week. Spotify and the podcast industry in general. I will say it was so frustrating to hear about the fact that the industry itself is doing okay. Actually, there are ad dollars for podcasts. Their listenership is going up. Podcasts continue to be a medium of growth, and yet because of the kind of tech culture of just throwing insane amounts of money at something without a plan or a real sense of how it will make money on return, has led to like all of these job losses and cuts and loss of amazing shows. And it was a very, very, very anger-making articles to read.
Absolutely. And I'm not even going to put you on the spot here to say anything about it, but of course you worked for Vox Media, as I mentioned, and Vox was also in the headlines. I guess it was last week, right before that Spotify story, I think, that also, layoffs hit your organization too. And it can't hit any closer to home than that. And again, if you want to respond to that, do, but I don't want to put you on the spot because obviously you're not here to speak on behalf of Vox Media.
Right. No, I mean, I guess luckily, the way Vox has handled their podcast business has been, I think, smart, especially like comparing it to what I've been reading in the papers about other companies. But of course, like the advertising industry, just the tumult of the medium and of the media has definitely impacted, like, at least the website, print, video, those areas. And unfortunately, we saw that hit again this week.
Yeah. Again, I know Luke and I say it on the show every single day, but it is so true that the reason a weird little show like ours is viable at all, that it exists at all, is because of our weird little model where people are donating directly. Obviously, that's not going to work for every single show. A news show or a show based on journalism is so much different than what we do, which is just like so personality based and wacky. But nobody really knows exactly what the future holds for any of this stuff. So like kind of just like probably, testing out various revenue streams is not the worst idea.
Right, exactly. That, and like not spending millions and millions of dollars to hire the flashiest celebrity thinking they can. I was reading this piece, actually, I think it was in Vulture, about some of the podcasts Spotify was trying to build up, and they were talking about the in particular the Meghan and Harry podcast, or Meghan and Harry getting just millions and millions thrown at them, and they were describing like some of the ideas Prince Harry had for podcasts, and one was like, he had this idea that he was like, what if we did a show where I booked like Vladimir Putin, Mark Zuckerberg, and Donald Trump, and we talk about their childhood trauma. Like, incredible.
I would listen.
I would. I would let someone else spend $20 million on. I think I would. Like, that seems like a smart move. But
I think so.
It's just, I think it just shows like just the naivete to think that any of those folks, maybe with the exception of Mark Zuckerberg, are at all like reflective about their childhood trauma, let alone be like being able to book them. Like, that's not even the hardest part.
Right. All right. Well, I could talk to you for another 25 minutes, but before I let you go, is there anything else that you wanted to throw out there before we wrap things up here for another week?
I guess the only other thing, and I don't want to put you on the spot at all by bringing up the story you told yesterday. Was it yesterday's show about the woman who you were driving around, the stranger who you were driving around? I was listening to that episode at maybe like 7 a.m. getting ready for work. And the thing that I was just reflecting on in that episode, I mean, right now we continue to live through some really, really tough times that really make you question humanity, and just like it makes it hard to find like a lot of hope in humanity. But then hearing a story like that just reminds me, like, it's so incredible to think that this person who was really struggling happened to meet people who were willing to who were just good people willing to help her through this difficult moment. And it was just like a quick moment where your lives were crossing, but you happened to cross at just the right moment. And I just think about that as someone who like lives alone in a big city like DC, and just always surrounded by strangers. I just kind of like, it gave me sort of hope that the people I'm surrounded by, like, if any of us found ourselves in an emergency, we would support each other first. Like when you're seeing like online comments and all the kind of negative discourse between people, it was just a lovely reminder that like at the end of the day we are human, and there are human beings who can still connect and support each other, like strangers can connect and support each other.
Yeah, and for me too, and that story that I told I went back and listened to it. It was so long and rambly. Like I was.
Oh no, it was so good. I was so riveted.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear you say that, because I was like, I know chunks of that story that I want to go back and edit out that were just like not necessary. I was like, oh my gosh. I told Luke I'm going to keep this quick, and then like 45 minutes later, I'm still going. But for me, and I don't think I said this specifically, but for me, It's thinking about the fact that I started that story by saying, like, usually I just sort of stick to my lane. Somebody wants coffee, a sandwich, whatever, I will provide it. Beyond that, I will say, good luck. We're here for you for those purposes. And if my friend Kathy hadn't been volunteering that day and this woman had come up and said, how do you get to Dexter Avenue? I might have been just like, I don't know. Anybody know? You know, it could have been, and
Right.
been like, well, good luck. Here's a cup of coffee, you know? And I don't know how many times I've done that. And then somebody had a terrible night because of that. Now, I think we do have to have some sort of boundaries when it comes to any strangers. So I'm not
Yes.
just going to like now throw myself at the mercy of everybody. But it was an interesting chain of events that makes me kind of sliding doors style wonder what had happened if Kathy hadn't been there, and then what would have happened to this woman, Margarita. So
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
Well, thanks for listening to that. Thanks for
course.
validating that story, which I felt like could really have used the old Vox cut. There's a little
It was
snip
great.
here, a little snip there.
I totally understand that editor brain, producer brain, like what you would cut out, what you would say, and I will constantly edit myself, sometimes in real time to the detriment of like what I'm saying. Like just get it out. Stop editing yourself as you're talking. But as a listener, I was so hooked and riveted, and I mean that's a weird thing to say about like a personal story about
Hey,
something that is really
say more.
but I did find myself having a kind of lean in driveway moment as because I think we all probably think about those moments in our lives where either we're in a tough situation or we're like faced, or we see someone having a tough situation, and there's that question of what am I going to do? How am I going to react? Or is someone going to help me through? My anxious brain is always thinking of all the emergencies I could find myself in at any moment, and like what will happen. And there's something calming thinking that, well, maybe hopefully there's a good person there who will help you through that moment.
Yeah. And there probably is. You just got to maybe in any moment find your person, maybe. But well, thanks for doing this with me.
Thank you.
I don't know, speaking of editing, I don't know if I'm going to edit this or not. Maybe we're just going to do a half hour of you and I talking about where the ISD boxes are located at KUOW. Or maybe the listeners have no idea what I'm talking about right now. But I had a blast talking with you. Thanks for doing this.
Me too. Thank you.
All right. And thank you, everybody, for listening. Thanks for donating. We'll talk to you next week.